Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples integrated recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice, no sugarcoating, no platitudes, no bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating the same old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. Hello, listeners. Today I am going to talk about a framework that pops up somewhat when I work with clients and relationship therapy. I integrate a handful of different relationship frameworks, Gottman and emotion-focused therapy, sometimes Imago. Today I'm going to focus a little bit on internal family systems because this was something that was profoundly helpful for me in my own healing and in my own relationship. And without going into a ton of details, I wanted to share about a period in my own relationship that fundamentally changed the way that I think about love, conflict, and what we are actually asking another person to do for us. So several years ago, my partner and I went through probably one of the hardest stretches that we have ever experienced, and we reached the point that I went back to therapy myself because I didn't know if it was going to work out, and we had had a lot of serious conversations about whether we were actually compatible with each other long term. We would go to family dinners and people could tell that there was something seriously wrong between us because I don't have a poker face. I can't go and pretend that everything is honky-dory, eating pizza with my family. If I'm upset, you could see it on my face. And nothing in our relationship ever had screaming things across the dinner table or any, big scenes. It was just an emotional distance that people could observe without anybody saying anything. And I am grateful for that period now, but certainly was not then, because there were a lot of times in that period that I thought I would do anything to not feel this emotional pain that I feel right now. And so I understand when people have thoughts about relapse or self-harm or any of those intrusive thoughts that pop up of, I will do anything to not feel this way in this moment. And that is worth saying out loud because every week I sit with people who describe moments like this where they have desperately wanted or needing relief, and sometimes they have fleeting thoughts about walking into traffic or whatever. And if you meet with a therapist at Community Mental Health, they'll just fucking Baker Act you in 2 seconds, and then you'll be sitting in a box for the next 3 days thinking about how you can't be honest in therapy. And I think that real therapy requires being able to say something really fucked up, I had thoughts of killing myself, or I had thoughts of relapse, or I had thoughts of doing whatever. That's not the same thing as I am going to leave here and go walk in front of a bus. Those are different things. But when emotional pain is relentless, the brain starts looking for any exit that it can, and it starts looking for anything that promises relief. And the relationship had gotten so painful that it was in that place for a while. Now, at this point, and in the relationship, I had already been a therapist for years, practicing and teaching other people things like how to communicate better, slow down, listen, validate, summarize, reflect back what you heard, use I statements, don't interrupt the person. Those are all great skills. I teach them every week. And then I experienced a place where my own relationship had a place where knowing all of those skills was not enough. We knew how to communicate. We knew how to take space when emotionally activated so that we wouldn't say harmful stuff to each other. All of those things seem pretty elementary to me now. I work with a lot of people that don't have those things. But around this time, I started learning about internal family systems, and the two of us read a book that I think was profoundly helpful, and it's by Dick Schwartz. He is the founder of Internal Family Systems, IFS, and the book for IFS in intimate relationships is You Are the One That You've Been Waiting For. I love that title. You are the one that you've been waiting for. This was not a casual read. We really digested it, got to know the different parts of ourselves, and got very uncomfortable with some exposing conversations. And we realized that we had spent years not even fully understanding what was happening between us. A lot of these conversations were very painful, going through a whole box of Kleenex and snotting and crying and all of those things. And one of the central ideas in IFS is that we all have different parts of ourselves. So I'm not talking about the M. Night Shyamalan movie where the guy has like 37 different personalities and then turns into a superhuman beast, can bend bars and go up walls and stuff like that. IFS talks about how we have different parts of ourselves. Some parts are protective. They developed at some point because in our lives they had to help us survive something that was emotionally difficult. So maybe you have an angry part that exists because anger once kept you from feeling powerless, or a controlling part that learned that staying in control was safer than having to trust somebody. A people-pleasing part, because if everybody's happy, then there's reduced conflict. So all sorts of different parts. And these protectors can look different, but Schwartz pointed out that if you ask them what they are afraid would happen if they stopped doing their job, nearly universally, there is some version of the same answer: I'll get hurt. And that's what they're trying to prevent. The problem is that while protectors are trying to help us, they are usually protecting something that is much younger, and IFS calls those younger hurt parts exiles. And exiles are the parts that carry shame, rejection, loneliness, humiliation, abandonment, fear, grief, or a belief that they are defective. And they are called exiles because at some point those feelings became too painful to carry in everyday life. You still had to go to school, you still had to function, you had to keep living, and those younger parts did not disappear. They got pushed out of awareness. So at one point, he describes these as, he uses a metaphor describing them as children living in the basement of the house, which I'll get to in a little bit. But think about your own house for a second. Upstairs is where daily life happens. It's where people cook dinner, watch Netflix, pay bills, have conversations, go to work, live their life. The basement is different. It's where you put the things that you don't really know what to do with. Maybe your old furniture, boxes, trophies from high school, things that don't really fit in everyday life anymore, but they still belong to you. And IFS says that a lot of us have done something emotionally similar. That we've got these exile or children living in the basement. The child who believed that he wasn't good enough. The child who never felt chosen. The child who learned that needing comfort was a disappointment. Or maybe one that learned that anger wasn't safe, or felt responsible for keeping everybody else okay, or one that was terrified of being left behind. And those parts never stopped existing, they just didn't get to live upstairs. So most of us become adults without realizing that they are still there. Because if you locked those children in the basement 20 or 30 years ago, you didn't just leave them there by yourselves, you posted guards outside the basement door, and those guards are protectors. So that could be an angry part, a controlling part, a withdrawing part, a perfectionistic part, a people-pleasing part, a hyper-independent part. All of those can be guards. Anything or anybody that keeps someone from opening that basement door. And that is why relationships and the reactions in relationships can become very confusing, because your partner says something that probably objectively deserves like a 5 out of 10 reaction, and instead your body gives you an 11 out of 10. Why is that? Because your partner wasn't just talking to the adult standing in the kitchen. They said something that echoed down the basement stairs, and suddenly the child who always experienced rejection thinks that rejection is happening again. Or the child that thinks that love is conditional thinks that it's about to be taken away again. The adult conversation is happening upstairs, but the emotional emergency is happening downstairs. And that distinction, I think, was important in our relationships. Doesn't excuse any behaviors, mine or my partner's, but it helped explain why we were having emotionally intense reactions over moments that, viewed from the outside, did not justify quite the reaction. And Schwartz uses a metaphor that I really like for understanding these relationships. So he asks you to imagine that your house has this magical kitchen. And I know that fantasy sounds bizarre, but so just imagine. Inside this magical kitchen is everything that your children could ever need. They are well fed. They are not starving. They are not desperate. They are not searching for scraps of food or attention or affection, because they are already being cared for very well inside their own home. Then one day, somebody knocks on the front door, and it's the pizza delivery guy, or it's Willy Wonka, the candy man, and he says, "I will give you and your children all of the pizza and candy that you could ever want. All you have to do is just spend the rest of your life taking care of me and my emotions." Now, if your kitchen is already feeding your children, then that offer sounds fucking ridiculous. Why would you ever spend your life regulating another adult just so that your kids could eat junk food that they don't even need? But change one variable. Imagine if your kitchen has been empty for years and the children in the basement are screaming because they are so hungry and they are so lonely and they are so frightened, and they are convinced that nobody is ever coming downstairs for them. Now, if the pizza delivery guy knocks on the door, the offer does not sound ridiculous anymore. It sounds like hope. And that's the bargain that Schwartz says that a lot of us unknowingly make when we fall in love, is that we meet somebody who makes us feel chosen. They text us back. They want to spend time with us. They look at us like we are fascinating, or they reassure us. They are affectionate, or maybe a little bit emotionally available, and then without realizing it, the basement children are believing someone has finally found us and someone is finally going to feed us. And that is why early relationships can feel almost intoxicating, because It isn't just attraction. It isn't just chemistry. It is relief from the loneliness and from the need to feel chosen and to feel protected, and to believe that suddenly you matter, like the center of somebody else's world. Of course, that feels incredible. The problem is that those experiences are not real. The problem is believing that another imperfect human is going to somehow keep feeding those children forever, because eventually your partner is going to get tired, they will be distracted, they will have a bad day, they're going to misunderstand you, they are going to forget something important. Maybe they want an evening to themselves, or they're stressed at work, or they're grieving something, or they're dealing with their own basement. And then with that, now the pizza deliveries are feeling less consistent. And then the children in the basement start to panic. And this is where a lot of couples think that a relationship has gone bad, but IFS would say that this is where protectors begin trying to solve the problem. So he describes several protector parts that show up over and over again in relationships. And some of these might include trying to change your partner. Thinking goes something like this: if I can just get you to become the person that you were in the beginning, then my basement children, my exiles, will feel safe again. So criticism increases, the arguments become more frequent, and you can become convinced that the relationship depends on getting your partner to behave differently. Maybe another protective part turns inward, and it thinks, maybe if I become better or if I'm different, then they'll love me. So you start doing the things that might make you, quote unquote, easier to love, or you lose the weight for that person, or you become less emotional for that person, or you work harder, or you try to anticipate their every need, or you stop asking for reassurance because you don't want to be too needy or too much. And surface level, it may seem like there is some improvement, but underneath is a hope that your partner will become your redeemer again. And another protector goes in a completely different direction. It starts looking for another redeemer. Maybe I picked the wrong person. Maybe my soulmate is still out there. Maybe my ex understood me better. Maybe this person at work would not make me feel the way that my partner does. And sometimes the fantasy is so intrusive that it never even leaves your imagination. Some people act on it. Either way, the basement children are still asking the same question: who is finally going to feed us? And when those strategies stop working, a lot of people stop looking to relationships altogether. They might start looking to alcohol or work or porn or shopping or eating or endless scrolling, anything that keeps them far enough that they don't have to hear the kids crying in the basement. Every one of those strategies is trying to accomplish the same thing: relief, not healing, relief. And that is an important distinction, because relief is temporary, but healing is what changes the system. So one of the biggest insights that I took from Schwartz and this book is that the communication skills by themselves often are not enough once those starving kids in the basement have been activated or smell the pizza. And so I say that as somebody who teaches communication skills for a living. A couple can learn reflective listening. They can learn how to validate each other or how to avoid criticism and contempt. Those are all valuable skills. But then somebody says one sentence that lands on an old wound, and suddenly all that shit goes out the window. Why? Because protective parts don't give a fuck about communication. They care about survival. And if my basement child thinks that it's about to be abandoned, then a protective part is not interested in carefully validating your perspective before responding. And if your basement child feels ashamed, then your protector is not interested in staying curious while I explain my intentions. The protective parts take over because they believe that they are preventing something catastrophic. And that's why some couples leave my office after having a great session. They really understand what they are supposed to do differently, and then they find themselves in the same fight 3 days later. It's not like they just randomly became stupid. Their protective parts became convinced that the basement door had been opened, and I think that is why relationships don't only improve when people become better communicators or better arguers. They become healthier when they become better historians of the other person. So when they start asking questions like, what is this reaction protecting? Or what part of me just showed up? Or what is this part afraid would happen if I didn't react this way? Which basement child got activated? Those questions completely change the direction of a conversation that you're having with a partner or anybody. Instead of trying to prove who is right, you start becoming curious about what got touched instead. And that was the beginning of a very different relationship for my partner and me. Wasn't that we never activated each other's wounded parts. It's that we stopped assuming that the hurt started today in this conversation. So what changed our relationship was learning how to speak about those vulnerable parts without making the other person responsible for fixing them. It sounds like it might be simple if you say it fast, but in practice it requires a lot of humility, because it's a hell of a lot easier to say, you made me feel abandoned. You did this. You're a bad partner. You're selfish. It's way easier to say that, and that is speaking from the protective part, as opposed to if you say, when you pulled away, something very young in me became afraid that I was losing you. So that first sentence put the wound in your partner's hands, but the second gives your partner access to what is happening inside of you while keeping you responsible for your own system. So IFS calls this speaking for your parts instead of speaking from them. Speaking from an angry protector can sound like accusation, contempt, control, withdrawal, or pressure. But speaking for a protective part sounds like a very angry part of me popped up when I felt dismissed, and I stayed with it, and I can see how I felt scared that I didn't matter to you. Big difference, right? The issue still gets addressed. The behavior is still important. The difference is that you are giving your partner the backstory instead of just giving them your weaponized response. And that became next level for us. We started learning what lived underneath each other's reactions. We learned which moments brought up fear, shame, helplessness, or old beliefs about being unwanted. We learned that some reactions that looked hostile were protecting something frightened, and that some reactions that looked indifferent may have actually been protecting against overwhelm, or that some demands for reassurance were coming from parts that had never learned how to feel secure. Once you know these things about each other, the relationship changes. You can still feel the impact of somebody's behavior, but you can understand where the intensity is coming from. You can see the wound. You can see the child underneath it. And then it becomes a hell of a lot harder to reduce your partner to the worst thing they did in a reactive moment, because you see the adult behavior and the basement child at the same time. And that kind of vulnerability has to be handled very carefully, because if somebody shows you the basement, they are giving you privileged information. They are showing you parts that they have spent years protecting, and they are admitting that the adult argument touched something younger, more frightened, and more ashamed. And if you're with a toxic partner who maybe uses that information later as ammunition, that's tough. That is not a safe relationship, because this requires safety and vulnerability, that this person will always treat those parts with care. That choice determines whether vulnerability creates intimacy or regret. So my partner and I had to learn that sharing vulnerable parts did not mean that every fear always gets accommodated. Your compassion needs boundaries. You can say, I understand why this scares you, but I can't give you reassurance every 5 minutes. Or you can say, I understand why conflict makes you want to shut down, but I still need you to be able to come back to this conversation after you compose yourself. You can care about the basement child while expecting an adult partner to be accountable. And that balance is really important, because IFS can be misunderstood if all you think it is an explanation for everything that is like an excuse for bad behavior. Your protectors may have history, but your partner has to live with the impact of those protective parts, which is why they need to be understood. And your fear might be understandable, but you are still responsible for the way that you express it. Your partner may trigger old stuff in you, but you have to figure out what belongs in the present relationship and what came in the room with you. So the fantasy of a relationship curing all of your pain begins to loosen when you start doing this work. That's why you are the one that you are waiting for. Your partner can love you, they can comfort you, they can support you, they can become a witness to your wounds and to your healing. They can learn which areas are still tender for you, and be very careful not to step on those injured places, but they cannot become the magical kitchen for every starving part of you. They cannot spend the rest of their life proving your worth every time an old part forgets it. That kitchen has to exist inside of you. You have to learn how to feed those parts that have been waiting for somebody else to arrive. You have to notice when you are making the pizza delivery guy deal, or agreeing to manage another person's emotions in exchange for small little hits of love, approval, protection, or reassurance. And you have to become somebody that your own basement children can trust. That changes what you ask for in a relationship, because you can still have closeness, you could still need repair, you could still want reassurance and affection. All of those things they absolutely belong in a relationship. Those needs start coming then from a more grounded place, because your whole survival is not riding on whether or not your partner responds perfectly to every time that you make a request. It also changes what you will tolerate, because people will put up with a tremendous amount of destructive behavior when a basement child believes that that is the only source of love that is available. If you're starving, then you're happy to eat a breadcrumb. Little bit of affection, little bit of protection, little attention, and then the whole system stays attached to the bargain. And when those exiled parts begin to heal, then that kind of a deal becomes a lot easier to see. You stop abandoning yourself just to feel chosen. Sometimes that healing strengthens the relationship. As one person becomes less driven by protectors, the other person's system may start to relax as well. You see less chasing, less defending, less testing, less pressure to perform a role, and both people have more room to just show up as adults. Sometimes it exposes that the relationship was built on roles that neither person can keep playing. One person may have been the rescuer, the other may have been the person who needed rescuing. One may have maintained power through distance, while the other person kept proving devotion through pursuit. And if these kind of contracts change, then the relationship has to change with them. So for us, in my relationship, that work brought us closer. We did not become conflict-free. We became more capable of understanding what the conflict was touching. We learned how to say, this is the part of me that is scared, instead of forcing the other person to decode what that shutdown or fear or anger or control or criticism or whatever was doing. We became witness to each other's vulnerable parts, and that created compassion where maybe in the past there had been suspicion. It created context where there had been blame. It helped us understand why certain moments carried so much emotional weight, and the relationship became a place where those parts could be seen without being handed complete authority. That's the kind of intimacy that I trust now, is two people who know something about each other's own basement children, understand each other's protective mechanisms or protective parts, and still expect the two adults in the room to take responsibility for how they're going to behave. That kind of relationship has room for pain without turning pain into the boss of everything. It has room for vulnerability without turning vulnerability into a demand. And it has room for repair because both people understand that some of the hardest moments are carrying much more history than the present thing or the present activating argument. So the goal in this is not to get rid of every protective part or to never trigger each other again. The goal is to know what is happening when the house starts shaking. You know who's pounding on the basement walls, you know which protective part or which guard has taken over, and you know how to slow down long enough to speak for frightened parts instead of letting them run the entire relationship. So that's what changed for us. We stopped fighting with each other's protective parts and started caring about what those protective parts had been protecting all along. So that is IFS for relationships. Again, the name of that book, if you found that framework helpful, was You Are the One That You've Been Waiting For. Another helpful IFS book, if you are interested in this way that he conceptualizes it, is No Bad Parts. So that's IFS. I have personally found a lot of healing from that framework. So that is doing the work in the relationships. Take what's helpful, discard what's not, and that's all I got. Thanks for listening. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to people around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we're all capable of growing past that. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there. In the meantime, thanks again for listening. I'll see you on the next one.